wanted to talk about balance today, in particular, balancing opposing forces as they talk about in Yin-Yang theory found in Daoist cosmology and a lot of other places too. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the yin-yang idea, this classic black and white symbol that have the two parts moving around each other, the white part going up to the top with a black dot in the middle and the black part coming around to the bottom with the white dot in the middle. There's a lot that can be said around this, but I wanted to talk to a specific aspect on it. You can have this idea as a way of comparing opposites, but we can also use it in triplicate, and the triplicate version is found in a lot of places in Daoist metaphysics. They talk about humans between heaven and earth. They talk about the sun, the moon, and the earth. There's loads of places this triplet shows up, Jing, Qi, and Shen. But I wanted to look at it today in another way, in a way that's a bit more practical on a day-to-day usage. So if we take the spectrum in its abstract form, we can see on one side the yin, the pure yin aspect, on the other side the pure yang aspect, and then in between those two the meshing or merging or union or transformation from yin to yang. So it's both of them together in some form or another. The balance principle as I use it means that one of these parts is not more important than the other. One is not more important than the other. And I want to give a few examples of how you would use this. So first of all, let's take a classic pair of opposites, which is the mundane day-to-day life that in the Daoist texts they often call the dust world. This is my life where I wake up, I have bills to pay, I've got my family are visiting, my in-laws are here, there's other people around, we're buying material stuff like tech and whatever. It's the day-to-day mundane part of our life. We could call this part the yin part. The opposite part to that is the spiritual part, which is the really esoteric aspect where we dive into like spirit and meditation and unity and deep states like this, where we have an ideal that we're moving towards in terms of spiritual accomplishment. If we take this and put it into this framework, we have mundane, we could put it on the yin side, we could put the spiritual aspect on the yang side, and then we could also see a third aspect, which is a meshing of the two, where the spiritual becomes more mundane and simultaneously the mundane becomes more spiritual. And this is a kind of ideal of the center that is strived towards. But we have to be careful. Often when there's this perfect ideal of the center, of the meshing of the two, we can start to see the more extreme ends of the spectrum as enemies of this. And that's not at all what the balance principle I'm talking about here gets at. It's not about a perfect balance between the two, but rather about opening up the bridge between the two, so then there's a freedom to move anywhere on that spectrum. I'm able to have very mundane experiences of my day-to-day life and be okay with that, be okay with having to have a job and going to a restaurant to chit chat with friends and doing stuff that's decidedly like non-spiritual, right? Like going to the movies to watch the latest whatever thing. This really like day-to-day mundane part of my life, which is really linked to like the animal side of needing to survive and needing social interaction and all of this kind of stuff. Then I have the yang side, the spiritual side of my life, where it might be like sitting in meditation, doing practice, doing retreats, diving into the depths of my being, whatever, finding loads of energy somewhere, having crazy experiences, whatever, all of this. And then there's this nice meshing of the two where I start to see my mundane day-to-day life as a reflection of the deep spirituality inherent in all of the world. and vice versa. Any crazy spiritual experiences kind of become seen in the same lens as I would just look at the phone in front of me and the mundane aspect. So the mundane and the spiritual start to mix and become kind of the same thing. It's not to say that this is the final outcome, it's just to open up this avenue so that in a balance, I've got a kind of freedom to move along this spectrum and experience any part of this spectrum for however long I experience it, and not get stuck in that part of the spectrum. So I'm not stuck only in the mundane, I'm not stuck only in the spiritual, and I'm not only experiencing this kind of balanced center point between that links the two or meshes the two together, but rather I'm able to move through that spectrum in a balanced way. To be able to do that, I need to treat all the parts of the spectrum as equally as important to any other part. I can't have the spiritual being more important than my mundane life, where I'm perpetually saying, my mundane life is getting in my way and I just need to tend to my spiritual stuff all the time. Nor do I want to go the other way around, right? I don't want to just do my mundane life and forget about my cultivation practices and forget about the depths of my humanity. And nor do I want to try and exist in the ideal of the center, where I'm somehow I've nailed it, I've gained enlightenment, and all I see is all wonder and glory in anything. Maybe that will happen, maybe not, but it's more about opening up the possibility of letting my life move through all of these points with an equal willingness to engage in any one of them. If we take the same spectrum and apply it to, say, conscious and unconscious, then we can see something similar. In unconscious behavior, I kind of check out, I go into autopilot, my unconscious habitual notions take over, I end up doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm not really aware of what's going on. On the other side, I have a conscious exploration of new possibilities, a conscious push into new territory, into managing things in a particular way, into really controlling every aspect of my experience in a conscious way. And then there's the meeting of the conscious and unconscious, where we're consciously aware of what's going on, but not consciously controlling. So it's a kind of union of the conscious and unconscious, where the conscious attention is able to rest on a given moment and allow the unconscious to actually organize and respond to that moment, a kind of nice mixing of the two. Again, we don't want to say that one's more important than the other. We need the possibility of moving between all of the spectrums. And let me give you a very simple example for this. If I'm, say, learning to drive a car, I come into a car for the very first time, I'm on my L plates, and I have to go into the conscious management mode. I have to learn, okay, I need to, put my foot here, press this thing, move my hand and move the shifter like this, and operate all the controls of the car, and that's that. And when a car's coming, I need to look over my shoulder and I need to turn like so. And there's this clunky rigidity behind the attempt to control and manage everything that comes with learning a new skill. It's a necessary part of the learning, actually, this moment where I'm kind of overdoing it and trying too hard and too forceful. At some point, with enough repetition of that, the unconscious absorbs the information, and as all the actions shift into the unconscious domain, I become able to drive the car and operate the vehicle and whatever without paying attention. Most people would leave it right there, and so when they graduate from their, getting their P plates or whatever, then for the rest of their life they just drive in an unconscious way. Not a bad thing. We need some of this to some degree, but there's another possibility. First of all, I could take my unconscious driving that I've been doing for 10 years or whatever, and then go do a defensive driving course, which would be back more in the yang, where I now learn a new set of skills associated with driving. And this is very young, and it's a good idea to do this. But I could also open to the middle area where I start to pay attention to what I do when I drive rather than having a podcast on, or rather than being distracted by a conversation with a passenger, or just checking out into my mind and not paying attention. I pay attention to how I drive, but I don't control anything. I look and observe the unconscious actions I take as I steer, as I move, as I shift lanes, as I stop and start at traffic lights, and so on and so forth. So this makes up the middle bit, the joining of the conscious attention with the unconscious control of the situation. This is a really nice aspect because it really opens up some possibility of a kind of natural or spontaneous evolution. Without trying, but just by observing, I will slowly make my shifts smoother. My unconscious, under that observation, will actually transform itself in a very, very strange way. But just because that mode is pretty cool doesn't mean I don't need the other two modes. I still need to go and do the defensive driving course and, or, learn about full driving or whatever parts of driving I want to learn about, learn more about the car and how it operates, have these moments of conscious management of learning new skills, of controlling something that I don't know yet until I get familiar with it. And I still need moments of like total release into the unconscious where I let the unconscious take all this information from the conscious observation of it and the conscious management of it, and just let it go into the background. Drive while you're a bit checked out, or while you're listening to a podcast or having a conversation with a friend. If you think back to all your moments, regardless of what level of practice you have, you might notice that these moments happen anyway, despite you trying your best to pay attention in your life. You might find that there are these moments, they just appear automatically. So it's about getting in accord with all these different possibilities and this natural movement from a kind of more yin aspect to a more yang aspect to a more balanced aspect. That's the mix of the two, and then out of that balance into unbalance again, either way, and so on and so forth. This kind of rhythm or flow that moves from one aspect to another. Pardon me. And the overarching goal of the practice as I approach it is to actually just free this spectrum up so we can move smoothly between it all, not get stuck in one or the other. Let's bring it to one last example where I look at something like a very popular topic at the moment, breath work, where you go for your whole life, you've never ever heard that breath work is a thing, you've been more or less breathing unconsciously for your whole life. You don't think about your breathing is just something that's happening in the background at any point in time, whatever. I've been breathing my whole life, I don't need to attend to it. That's the yin side, the unconscious side. Then at some point, I get invited along to a breathwork workshop or whatever. There's about a gazillion of them available these days, Wim Hof or pranayama or whatever, pick one. And I learn a bunch of techniques where I manage my breathing through a breathing technique. In this moment, I start to pay attention to my breath, but I also start to control my breath consciously. I start to make myself breathe in particular ways. I start to, rhythmic breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, or this like hyperventilating breathing that's really popular at the moment that I don't particularly like, by the way. And anything, pick a way where I look at my breath and then make my breathing follow any kind of particular pattern, and there's an essence of control about it. The middle option is to go into the more kind of Buddhist style or spiritual style of observing the breathing without interfering with the breathing, actually just letting the breathing express itself and letting the rhythm of the breathing happen naturally, and just letting the breath transform itself under observation or not. This kind of meeting between the unconscious process of breathing and conscious attention. This is a really nice moment where, when I relinquish control of my breathing, I actually see where my breathing works in the unconscious sense. Is my breath actually deep unconsciously, or does it only get deep when I consciously manage it? And sometimes you can look into why that is and all the different options. And on the flip side, I also need to have moments where I completely forget about my breathing and let it do its thing, because otherwise I'm perpetually in this kind of almost like partially anxious state about, am I breathing right? Is it right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I paying attention to my breath? And that brings a kind of charge where I don't have any release and I get too rigid about it, and that can be exhausting after a while. So again, the point of the breathing practices as I present them in a balanced way is not to always be controlling the breath, is not to only ever land at this observation of the breath without manipulation, and is not to never pay attention to the breath, but actually to have the whole, all of those possibilities along a spectrum be open, and to develop them in whatever way you need to develop them. You know, the control obviously needs particular practice, as does the middle part, but I also need moments where I just put my practice down and forget about it for a while, and get on with other parts of my life. So hopefully this has given you a sense of what I mean by balance. And of course, you can take this little spectrum of yin, yang, and the kind of center meeting point and apply it to lots and lots and lots of different contexts, and see if it's useful to arrange it like that, and see if there's maybe a piece missing that you could bring back in that would bring some balance into your life. And then if you do that, what happens? You know, how does that change my experience of my life? You know, if I've spent the last 5 years just not paying attention to something at all, totally in that unconscious state, how does it change when I actually start to pay attention and control it? And how does that change again when I relinquish that control but still pay attention? And how does that change again when I finally stop paying attention and let it go back to the unconscious? This kind of like real deep curiosity to allow, you know, all these parts to balance all the other parts. You've got the pure yang, the pure yin, and the kind of mixing of the two, that one is not more important than the other. So try and keep this in mind. Try and take this concept, or if you like, take this concept and apply it. And if you have any examples you want to ask about, throw it down in the comments. I hope this has been somewhat helpful and maybe gives you a new perspective on whatever training you're doing. Yeah, let me know if it helps. Let me know if you have any particular examples where it did help, like applying this framework, and let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to learn more or support my work, head on over to my website, craigmallet.com. You're also welcome to join my community, which can be found at community.craigmallet.com or via the menu on my main website. I generally have a number of services available. If you'd like some help, just reach out. I have a student program, I have online courses, I have workshops and private consultations, all available to any who would want it. As always, to appease the algorithm gods, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and/or share.